I used to think that if I stayed clear-headed and dignified as Empress, I could survive the deep palace and come out unscathed. But the young emperor kept pressing closer, step by step. Favor and intrigue, tests and sincerity, he placed them all before me. Old childhood affection collided with the deadly game of imperial power. And when I finally chose to stand at his side again, I understood. There had never been any spectators in this game to begin with. He snarled at me. "You're not allowed to throw me away after you've gotten what you wanted." "Take him away," I ordered, expressionless. "The emperor is drunk. His mind isn't clear." Alexander clung to the doorframe and refused to go. He even tried to threaten me. "Chloe, if you throw me out today, don't regret it later." I sat at the table, turning the pages of a book, utterly unmoved. For a moment, everything went still. Then his tone abruptly softened. Eyes reddened, he shuffled over pitifully and tugged at my sleeve. "Fine, sister. I'm the one who'll regret it." When Alexander sobered up, he put on a different face and denied everything. He said he was already a mature emperor. Last night's clinging and coaxing had been an accident, and I shouldn't take it to heart. I smiled gently. "Exactly. Yesterday, Consort Grace sent word that she isn't feeling well. After court, why don't you go see her?" His expression sank. "Is that how badly the Empress wants to send me away?" I choked, at a loss for words. "Isn't that what you want?" But I couldn't let go of the image of a proper noblewoman. I held my soft smile. "Providing heirs is the Emperor's duty. As Empress of the realm, it's my responsibility to advise you." "Empress," Alexander looked at me, angry and wronged. After a long moment, he ground his teeth and dismissed the servants crowding the room. "All of you. Out, I want to speak with the Empress alone." And then, while I was still baffled, he suddenly reached out and undid the gauzy skirt I'd only half put on. He grabbed my undergarment and pinned me down, biting my lip. I went rigid. "Are you a dog?" Alexander snorted. "Sister, your mouth is sharp, but your body is soft as anything." I never would have imagined 17-year-old Alexander could say something so obscene. My heart ached with outrage. "Did you forget? When you were a month old, I even held you." I couldn't finish. Alexander's long, warm hand slid from the butterfly bones of my shoulder blades slowly downward, sending shivers through me. Help. He was far too good at this. Bearing the legitimate heir is the Empress's duty, too. Catching the desire in my eyes, the rippling light there, he suddenly smiled, the corner of his mouth lifting. "It's a rest day today. I don't have to attend court. Sister, take your time and enjoy." That smug tone was so childish. I sighed helplessly, stopped struggling and closed my eyes. Silly child. He was young, tireless, brimming with energy, and he suited me well. Not enjoying it would be a waste. Alexander and I were childhood sweethearts. I was the legitimate daughter of a grand secretary in the cabinet. He was the crown prince. We grew up together, only I was 5 years older. When Alexander was a month old, I held him. When he was just learning to speak, I was learning embroidery. By the time he'd made progress under the late emperor's teaching, my parents were already searching for a marriage match for me. Back then, the late emperor had been gravely ill for a long time. The court was unstable. If Nathan hadn't forced his way through all opposition and pushed Alexander onto the throne, the dynasty might have changed hands. When Alexander came to the scholar's residence to see me, his eyes were red. "Sister, are you getting married?" I turned my head and coughed twice, answering honestly, "I'm afraid it won't happen." I was sick. At first it was only a cold. Then the high fever wouldn't break. I was bedridden for more than 2 months. The family I was engaged to saw this and hurried over to discuss breaking off the engagement. They said I hadn't even married in yet, and I was already so ill. My health must be poor, and I wouldn't be able to continue their family line. The engagement was dissolved. Somehow, news of my illness spread through the noble households of the capital. Just like that, my prospects froze. Later, my parents kept me at home until I was 20. They felt they couldn't delay any longer, so they lowered their standards and negotiated another match, an eldest son born of a concubine in the Vice Minister of Personnel's household. They said he was truly unfortunate looking, which was why he still wasn't married in his 20s. But in the second month after the engagement was set, the Vice Minister of Personnel was suddenly imprisoned for taking bribes and selling offices. My marriage fell apart again. My reputation was already terrible. I had even prepared myself to spend my life with a lamp and a Buddha. Then, out of nowhere, an imperial edict arrived at the scholar's residence. Alexander was making me empress. I was stunned. My parents were stunned too. Marrying Alexander, 5 years younger than me, and becoming empress was something I wouldn't have dared to dream of. Eunuch Lu came to announce the edict, smiling so hard his eyes narrowed. The emperor is in the palace discussing affairs with Chancellor Nathan. He'll come to visit Miss Chloe later. In truth, I hadn't seen Alexander for almost half a year. I hadn't expected he'd grown so tall. When he arrived, he wore only a light teal brocade robe. He looked like a refined young lord, his face like a richly painted portrait. A faint weariness lay between his brows and in his eyes, yet it couldn't hide that sharp, icy presence. His lips were pressed tight, and ink stained his knuckles. When he saw me, Alexander paused, then visibly relaxed. I stepped forward and saluted, then asked, "Why did you decide to make me empress?" Alexander opened his mouth as if to answer, but when his gaze shifted past me, he hesitated. Then he said, "Because naturally sister is the most suitable choice." I turned. My parents had already walked over. By etiquette, an unmarried girl shouldn't be present when marriage talks were discussed. I withdrew with composure. The moment I left, I went straight to the back window and began to eavesdrop. I've been on the throne for over 3 years. The ministers keep urging me to establish an empress soon, but the turmoil still hasn't settled. How can I be at ease? Lord Edward was father's trusted pillar. I trust you as well. And besides, Sister Chloe and I have grown up together. We know each other's roots. I understood. Though my father was a cabinet scholar with lofty rank, he held little real power. Having me as empress was perfect. After 2 broken engagements, marrying again would be nearly impossible. Becoming empress was already the best ending. And so, the Astronomical Bureau chose an auspicious day. Alexander and I were married. I sat in the bridal sedan in phoenix crown and embroidered robes. A procession of red stretched 10 miles into the palace. Then Alexander appeared. We bowed, and we entered the bridal chamber. When the veil was lifted, I raised my eyes obediently and repeated to myself 3 times, "I am a virtuous empress." He was only 17. The harem was still empty, and he had no experience with women. The 2 of us had nothing but shallow theory. We could only fumble awkwardly beneath the bed curtains and learn by doing. Outside, the wedding candles burned. One piece of clothing after another fell away. After Alexander undressed me until I had only a red undergarment embroidered with a luan bird, his expression suddenly tightened. I was tense too. But as a virtuous empress, I had to steady him. "Don't panic. Take it slowly." Alexander suddenly looked displeased. He bit my ear. Pain and tingling surged together. I sucked in a sharp breath, and then I heard him say, "I insist on going fast." Damn it. This child was rebellious. I frowned in pain, but remembering what the nanny had instructed, I didn't dare make a sound. Alexander looked up, saw my frown, and his expression softened. He kissed my lips and whispered, "Does it hurt a lot, sister? Then I'll go slower." By the end, I had no strength left. Half asleep, on the verge of drifting off, I suddenly felt him squeeze my hand. His lips brushed my forehead, and he murmured, "Chloe, I finally married you." His voice was full of relief and tenderness, even with a faint, heavy sigh. It didn't sound like Alexander at all, the sulky child I still saw in him. But maybe I'd imagined it. Because in the 2nd month after I became empress, Alexander came to me one day after court and tossed a thick booklet onto the table. I was halfway through breakfast and quickly rose to salute. He frowned, his voice oddly sour. No need for formalities. I picked up the booklet and flipped through it. Good heavens, it was filled with beauties of every style, each with her name and background beside her. "Your Majesty, this is..." I already half understood, but not completely. Or perhaps I was still hoping Alexander would say something to prove me wrong. Alexander sat down across from me, took a sip of soup, and looked at me seriously. "I'm selecting consorts." Ha! Men. I knew it. I nearly lost control and slapped the book right into his face. Forcing up a thin smile, I tried to advise him. "You're still young. Selecting consorts should be considered carefully." Alexander's face darkened. He cut me off sharply. "Empress, don't try to persuade me, I've decided." "Fine, I'll shut up," I said obediently. "I'll arrange it at once. But what kind of women do you like?" gentle and sweet, clever and dignified. Alexander's gaze paused on me, like the Empress. I hadn't expected Alexander at such a young age to have the same taste as those old rigid men at court, preferring virtuous, proper women. I scoffed, but I still made arrangements. I selected a dozen or so mild-tempered girls and brought them into the palace. Based on their father's ranks, I drafted their titles and residences and took the list to Alexander for approval. But he suddenly seemed not to care. He glanced once and flicked the papers aside. Instead, he hooked an arm around my waist and pulled me beneath the bed curtains with him. As a virtuous empress, I continued to admonish him. It isn't proper to indulge in this during the day. Alexander didn't argue with me like he usually did. He only closed his eyes and buried his face in the hollow of my shoulder. Sister, I'm so tired. I paused. My fingers settled on his back, patting lightly in comfort. He'd been busy with state affairs. I'd been busy selecting women. We hadn't seen each other in days. I hadn't realized he'd grown this thin. When he was 6, the late Empress died. When I went to the palace to visit, he was kneeling before her spirit tablet. When he saw me, he stumbled into my arms, his pale little face pressed to my shoulder, his voice still thick with sobs. Sister Chloe, I don't have a mother anymore. I sighed inwardly. Enough. Alexander was 5 years younger. In the end, he was still a child. I was already a grown empress. Why should I bicker with him? Nathan has done me a great service, Alexander said in a low voice. But in the end, his power is too great. That isn't good for me. Sister, when it comes to Nathan, I often feel like I'm being ungrateful. Honestly, I felt the same. But a ruler playing power games will inevitably wrong one or two people. I thought for a moment, then comforted him and offered a suggestion. That's how balance works. Besides, you've always relied on Chancellor Nathan. If you truly feel you owe him, then compensate him another way. Alexander fell silent for a while. Sister is right. And the next day I heard he'd granted Nathan a marriage. They said it was to Prince Jingmon's younger sister Daisy. Her portrait and profile were in that booklet too. She was pretty enough, but her temperament was vicious. It even seemed she had something improper going on with her own brother. So this was the compensation? What kind of grudge was this? The day the consorts entered the palace happened to be the 15th. By palace rules, Alexander should have spent the night in my palace. But the newly installed consort Virtue, her father had recently won Alexander's favor, benefited from it, and became the first consort to receive his attention. I wasn't unhurt, but I also knew perfectly well this was the torment an empress must endure. So I told Cherry to set the evening meal. I planned to eat and go to bed early. I didn't expect that halfway through the meal, Alexander would actually come. He was neatly dressed, without the faintest trace of powder or perfume. Before I could ask, he spoke first. Consort Virtue is ill. She's already resting. I realized I haven't seen the Empress in a long time, so I came by. He sat down and ate with me. He even had Cherry serve him a bowl of rice. Your Majesty, if I remember correctly, we slept together last night. Only my period hadn't ended, so we hadn't been together as husband and wife. Alexander choked slightly. He set down his chopsticks and looked at me, plainly displeased. Sister doesn't want me here? I smiled politely. If you come, I'm naturally delighted. All of you out! Alexander dismissed the servants in a huff. Then he grabbed my wrist and leaned in. Before I could react, he lifted me into his arms and rolled with me onto the bed. My soft gauze skirt was stripped away. His long fingers, carrying the faint scent of ink, slid along the edge of my undergarment and closed around a handful. I sucked in a breath. Then Alexander's voice brushed my ear. Sister, is your period over? You. He bit at my chest. When he lifted his head, there was a deeper hunger in his eyes. Sister, I missed you. Because of that one sentence, we went at it until deep into the night and called for hot water 3 times. In such matters, Alexander and I had found our rhythm. We matched all too well. But at the height of it, a voice in my heart reminded me. This young, passionate Alexander did not belong to me alone. I didn't truly want to be virtuous, gentle, and dignified. It was only that my mother had drilled it into me 1,000 times. A woman must be broad-minded and virtuous to win her husband's favor. Even though my parents' relationship was so good, my father still took 2 concubines. Alexander, as emperor, could never be asked for fidelity. It had always been this way. If something doesn't belong to me alone, I'd rather not have it. The thought ripped a dull ache through my chest. Alexander paused. His voice softened. Sister, are you crying? His hot fingertip brushed the corner of my eye. I swallowed the storm of thoughts and praised him instead. I'm not crying from sadness. I'm crying because you're impressive. In the dim candlelight, Alexander actually flushed. He held my fingers and called softly, Sister. The word was sticky, blurred with desire. It nearly melted my heart. I closed my eyes. Male beauty ruins people. The emperor of a nation, using a beauty trap. The next morning, Alexander left early for court. I stayed in bed a little longer, and Cherry came in to report that the consorts had come to pay their respects. When I arrived, the room was already full of chattering, fluttering girls. But under Alexander's preferences and my screening, all of them were mild-tempered. They saluted properly and spoke softly. It was harmonious. All except Consort Beauty. The booklet said she was a tutor's illegitimate daughter, strikingly lovely, gentle in temperament. Who knew the girl had two faces? After leaving me, she happened to run into Alexander in the imperial garden after court. Witnesses said Consort Beauty hurried a few steps, went limp, and fell into Alexander's arms. In a syrupy voice, she said, "Greetings, Your Majesty." Witnesses also said Alexander shoved her away at once. Like a startled rabbit, he sprang aside and frowned. "Are you having a fit?" Before Alexander even came over, Consort Beauty was already here. Twisting a handkerchief, she came to me in tears. "I truly didn't mean to disturb the emperor, and I never meant to offend you." She wore a pale, moon-white blouse and a gauzy skirt. With tears in her eyes, she looked like a delicate flower caught in the rain. "Now the emperor detests me. What am I supposed to do?" I sipped my tea and watched her performance. She cried for a while. When she saw I wasn't reacting, she paused, then continued. "Please help me think of a way, Empress," I said warmly. "Consort Beauty, you may not know this, but the emperor likes gentle, virtuous women. What you did in the imperial garden was a bit forward. It's only natural he didn't like it." Consort Beauty eyed me suspiciously. "Go back and copy the virtues of women and admonitions for women 50 times each." She was furious, but she didn't dare speak. In tears, she accepted the order and turned to leave, only to run into Alexander as he stepped inside. So I finally saw the Alexander from the rumors, the one who sprang away like a startled rabbit. Consort Beauty, who instinctively wanted to fall into him again, could only straighten up awkwardly. Her pretty eyes were still swimming with tears. "I take my leave." But Alexander had already withdrawn his gaze. He didn't even notice her pitiful look. I watched with interest for a moment. When Alexander came to my side, I returned to myself. "Why are you here so early today?" Alexander hesitated, then his expression turned grave. "Julian is back." I froze. Julian, heir to Marquise Agnon, was also a childhood companion of mine and Alexander's. The year before Alexander ascended the throne, he followed Marquise Agnon to the southwest fief. In the blink of an eye, 5 years had passed. The next day, Julian entered the palace to see me. He sighed, full of feeling. "The Empress rules the inner court, but the Emperor is still a child." I smiled gently. For the Emperor, I was the best choice at the time. For me, the Emperor was as well. As I spoke, Alexander entered with a dark expression, and the moment he stepped inside, he began driving Julian out. "It's late. You should leave the palace." I held it in, but in the end I couldn't. "If it's all right, I haven't seen the heir in a long time. Can we talk a little longer?" "No." I wanted to slap Alexander. "Brat." In the end, Julian saluted and withdrew. He promised that next time he entered the palace, he would bring me the pastries I used to like when I lived outside. After he left, Alexander still sat at the table, face cold. I didn't want to soothe him, so I simply sat with him, smiling politely. At last, Alexander spoke. "Sister, do you remember my 18th birthday is coming?" He bit down hard on the word 18th. I blinked. "Isn't it still 7 months away?" Alexander's expression eased a little, but he was still unhappy. "If I say it's coming, then it's coming." I could barely keep from laughing. "As long as you're happy." Alexander clearly wasn't, because the moment I said that, he swept his sleeve and left. That night, Alexander turned to Consort Nobility's nameplate. After that, for 7 straight days, he chose Consort Nobility. He chose her so often that Consort Beauty squatted in the bushes outside Consort Nobility's palace every day, waiting for him. I admired her persistence and issued an order for her to copy the palace rules another 50 times. That same day, news came from court. Flooding had struck South Prefecture. Chancellor Nathan requested permission to go inspect the G River dikes. An elite unit was assigned to protect him, led by consort nobility's father, a general under the Xuanwu army. At last I understood Alexander's intent, but I couldn't do what consort beauty did. Alexander's actions only made me see more clearly. He was the emperor. He would never be an Alexander who belonged to me alone. Unpredictable, never certain, always gaining and losing. This was normal. I woke from the illusion brought on by those tender moments and desire, even by the years of childhood closeness. That night, when Alexander came to my bedchamber, I received him with politeness and distance. My manners were flawless. But when he tried to take me, I still couldn't hold it in. I lost control and shoved him away. Alexander froze, then grew agitated. "Sister, what are you doing? You don't want to be close to me. It's been a long time since you came. I'm out of practice." I smiled perfectly, then removed my outer robe and undergarment myself. "Come on, then." Alexander stared at me as if enraged. The corners of his eyes reddened. His thumb brushed my bare shoulder, and he curled his lips into a smile heavy with desire. "Rest early, sister. I'll go see consort nobility." I kicked Alexander off the bed. I thought he'd be furious. Instead, he rolled, got up, and looked at me with bright eyes. "I'm going to consort nobility's. Sister, are you unhappy?" How could I be? I pulled my clothes closed again and thought for a moment. "It's just that consort nobility has attended you for many days. If the harem's favors are too uneven, others may grow dissatisfied. Why don't you go sit with consort Grace instead?" Alexander didn't go anywhere in the end, but he didn't touch me either. Instead, he called Cherry in, had her add another quilt, and then slept as far from me as he could. Before we fell asleep, he glared at me through clenched teeth. "I had no idea you could be so generous, sister." I closed my eyes to hide what I was feeling. "You must be joking. If I weren't virtuous and proper, why would you have made me Empress?" The days grew hotter, yet Alexander and I slipped into a strange, chilly stalemate. He was busy with state affairs and only entered the harem once every 10 days, sometimes not even for half a month. News from court kept arriving. First came word that Minister Yan had been injured. Then the old scandal between Minister Yan's wife and Prince Jing'an resurfaced. In the end, Prince Jing'an was stripped of his title and died by poisoning. Minister Yan resigned and returned to his hometown. Alexander tried again and again to keep him. In the end, Minister Yan remained at court, but in a post with no real power. That was probably the best ending Alexander could manage. Thinking back to the day Alexander cried against my shoulder, my heart softened despite myself. I had Cherry chill a cup of rose and cherry dessert, planning to take it to the imperial study to see him. But when I reached the imperial study, Eunuch Lu stopped me. He offered an awkward but polite smile. "Empress, His Majesty isn't in the study." I kept my voice gentle. "That's fine, just tell me where he went." "The emperor went to consort Grace's palace." Eunuch Lu hesitated, and he said he only went because he was following the empress's advice. My smile didn't shift. "I understand. Thank you for the trouble, Eunuch Lu." Cherry and I turned back. I ate the rose and cherry dessert myself, though it had already melted into lukewarm sweetness. Cherry tried to comfort me. "Empress, don't be sad." I shook my head. "Cherry, at home I was Chloe, the legitimate daughter of an inner cabinet scholar. In the palace, I'm the empress. In either role, I have no business being sad." I had always been clear-headed. That was Alexander. The boy who, when I was 17, picked an entire armful of camellias for me. And now, the emperor seated high upon the dragon throne, decisive in punishment, cautious to the point of suspicion. His heart and the way he looked at me were always wrapped in mist. I could never see him clearly. Maybe he liked me, but it was uncertain and never steady. So I decided I didn't want it. On Alexander's birthday, it was already deep winter. Early that morning, he came to my palace. He beat around the bush, dropping hints about wanting a gift. He was 18, and yet he was still the same as he'd been as a boy. I had Cherry bring out the piece of green jade I'd carved myself. Alexander held it, turning it over for a long time, before finally delivering his polite verdict. "The carving is passable." That tone made me want to hit him. I said flatly, "If you don't like it, You don't have to force yourself. Give it back. Alexander immediately stuffed it into his robe. Who says I don't like it? I like it a lot. I was satisfied. Even though we were still at odds, I had to admit Alexander was a good emperor. His 18th birthday wasn't celebrated lavishly. He only ate a simple meal in my palace. The consorts all sent proper, unremarkable gifts. Only consort Beauty, still unwilling to give up, came through the heavy snow in thin clothing. She begged to be admitted, saying she wanted to dance for the emperor. I had barely let her in before I glanced at Alexander and saw his face turn cold. Consort Beauty wore a red dress. Gold bells were tied around her bare ankles. She knelt and bowed, delicate as a willow. Before she could speak, Alexander snapped, shameless. With that, he flicked his sleeve and went into the inner chamber. Consort Beauty looked at me, tears trembling in her eyes. I could only sigh. I told you before. The emperor only likes women who are virtuous and proper. You refused to listen. I didn't know, and now I've made the emperor dislike me. She sobbed for a while, then bowed to me again. Thank you for the Empress's guidance. I know what to do from now on. I had Cherry bring a thick cloak, draped it over her shoulders, and sent her out. After that, I had no mood to celebrate Alexander's birthday. I held my cup and sat alone at the table, sipping tea. But he slipped back out, sat across from me, and hinted that he wanted to go outside the palace for a walk. I thought of the pastries and dishes I hadn't had in a long time. I agreed. Yet when the carriage had only reached the area near the palace gate, a servant ran up to report that the newly appointed chancellor had an urgent matter. He was waiting in the imperial study to see Alexander. It was delivered with such urgency that it had to be serious. I wanted to tell Alexander not to go, but when I opened my mouth, what came out was the same familiar line. In that case, go deal with it. State affairs come first. Alexander looked at me. A sharp wind, thick with snow, swept past my ears. He seemed to want to say something. In the end, he only nodded and said lightly, I'll handle state affairs first. It's cold and the snow is heavy. Outside the palace isn't safe. Empress, go back to the scholar's residence and rest for a while. After Alexander left, I went home. Outside, bitter wind and snow beat against the window lattice. Inside, the charcoal glowed bright. I prodded the coals with a long silver poker, lost in thought. My mother sat across from me. She peeled an orange with a handkerchief, patiently scraping away the white pith with a silver hairpin, then handed it to me. I asked, Where's father? Someone in Consort Bai's family has fallen ill. I had the storeroom select some medicine, and your father went along to visit. She looked at me, smiling with a hint of emotion. I never imagined you'd marry into the royal family. I never imagined it, either. Alexander and I were 5 years apart. By any logic, it shouldn't have been me. A few days ago, Julian came by the residence. He's still not married. Originally, he would have been the best match for you. I cut her off. Mother, be careful. Walls have ears. Her lashes trembled, and tears fell. You've only been in the palace a month, and the emperor has already begun selecting women. How could your days be easy? I was quiet for a moment, then told her Alexander and I treated each other with respect, and most of the consorts behaved. It wasn't too hard. I've lived like this for years, so it doesn't hurt, but what is there to hope for? Chloe, you were lively and clever when you were little. Why have you grown quieter as you've gotten older? I lowered my eyes. Nothing, I just grew up. Before I married, I once imagined a harmonious life afterward. But between Alexander and me were too many layers. Court affairs, the harem, and the restraints of our identities. In the end, it could only be like this. I stayed at the scholar's residence until nightfall. My father finally returned. Consort Bai greeted me gently, then returned to her small courtyard. I was about to speak with my father when a servant reported that Alexander had come to the scholar's residence to fetch me. When he entered, he brought wind and snow with him. I looked up and realized how tall he'd become. Alexander's face was cold. He excused my parents from formalities, refused their invitation to stay for a meal, and took me straight back to the palace. On the way back, the wind and snow only grew worse. After hesitating, I still asked, that chancellor who sought an audience today, what urgent matter was it? It was a truce. Alexander's tense expression eased at once. He lifted the corner of his mouth in a smile. Nothing. Just that the remnants of the late Marquis Jingnan still refuse to give up. They're recruiting around Farwatch City. I've ordered the Xuanwu general to take men there and deal with it. The harem was not supposed to meddle in politics, but about Marquis Jingnan Theodore, I'd heard bits and pieces from Alexander. They said the poison in Nathan's body had been planted by Theodore, and Theodore's death had something to do with Nathan's wife, Lily. I thought it over, then looked up and tested the waters. Since you plan to rely on the Xuanwu general, perhaps consort nobility's rank should be raised again? Consort nobility was already one of the 4 consorts. If she rose further, she would become noble consort. The smile vanished from Alexander's face. He stared at me and ground out, "He's a subject, and I'm the ruler. Using him is only natural. Besides, are you truly that generous? I'm only thinking of your governance." Even I didn't believe my own tone. Alexander looked angered. The moment we entered the palace, he stepped down from the carriage and said without looking back, "No need to raise her rank, but what you said does make sense. I'll go see consort nobility tonight." The path was piled with snow, hard to walk on, yet he moved quickly, never once turning around. By rights, I should have seen him off with a bow, but when I opened my mouth, my tongue curled tight. The pain was so sharp, I could barely make a sound. Back in my chambers, Cherry asked anxiously, "Empress, why are you crying?" I lifted my hand and found it icy and wet. I always said Alexander was awkward, yet I was just as unbearable. For the next month, Alexander never entered the harem. Naturally, he never came to see me. Cherry brought back news often. The Xuanwu general led troops to Farwatch City and wiped out the Marquis Jingnan remnants in a single strike. Nathan's younger sister was about to be married, and Alexander personally attended the ceremony. He also took the chance to settle an old grudge between her and a young man from the Bai family of Sparrow Prefecture. That night, after Alexander returned to the palace, he came to see me. Cherry had just brought me a bowl of medicine she'd brewed when Alexander strode in. Seeing me drink it, his voice turned urgent. "What's wrong with the Empress?" "Just a cold. It's nothing." Reporting to the Emperor, the Empress's cold is severe. Her constitution is weak. The doctor instructed her to take her medicine on time. Cherry and I spoke at the same time. I rubbed my forehead, helpless, and turned to scold her. "It's such a small matter. Why tell the Emperor and trouble him?" Alexander sat across from me and set his teacup down hard on the table. He said coldly, "Chloe, you won't even tell me you're sick. Are you really planning never to speak to me again for the rest of your life?" He wasn't speaking as the Emperor. He didn't call himself I. Cherry slipped out silently, leaving the room to Alexander and me. I held the thin white porcelain bowl, silent for a moment. Then I said, "You're the one who hasn't entered the harem in 2 months. How does that become me, refusing to speak to you?" Only after I said it did I realize how resentful my tone sounded, like some bitter woman trapped in her chambers. It was ugly. When I was 8, my mother took me to her parents' home for a visit. I had an uncle who, within half a year of marrying, took 6 concubines. When we arrived, my aunt was crying and shouting at him, demanding to know whether he understood the crime of favoring concubines and neglecting his wife. She cried for a long time before my uncle finally opened the door and said impatiently, "If you think I'm guilty, go report me to the authorities." Men have always been fickle. Even then, I thought it was ugly. I would rather be a virtuous, proper wife from the start. If I never gave my heart, I would never end up like spilled water, impossible to gather again. I closed my eyes and said hoarsely, "I was rude. Please pretend you didn't hear it." The room went quiet. Then Alexander suddenly reached out and seized my wrist. "If that's the case, then from now on I'll come see the Empress more. All right?" After he turned 14, he rarely softened his voice like this with me. The hard shell I'd forced around my heart melted at once. After a pause, I answered softly, "All right." The weather grew hotter. One day, Cherry told me Alexander had actually summoned Lily, Nathan's wife, into the palace. Remembering that Alexander had mentioned her background to me before, I couldn't help feeling curious. The kitchen had chilled 2 cups of rose and cherry dessert. I had Cherry bring them, and I carried them to see Alexander. But the moment I walked in, I heard him ask, dark-faced, "Lady Gaoyang, do you think I don't dare punish you?" Lily replied without expression, "You dare. Do it." My heart jolted. I knew at once the boy was picking a fight again for no reason. I quickly raised my voice. Emperor, think it over. Lady Gao Yang and Minister Yan are deeply devoted. Why must you be the one to break up a pair? In my haste, I spoke too bluntly. I thought Alexander would be angry. Instead, he turned, eyes bright, and looked at me. The Empress is right. Cherry set the desserts on the table. Alexander lunged forward to look, tugged my sleeve, and whined, Rose and Cherry, sister really knows what I like. Then, almost provocatively, he glanced at Lily, like a child showing off his favorite toy. I found it funny, yet a sour ache rose in me. I watched Alexander drink 1 cup in a single swallow. Then he said gently, Empress, go back first. I'll come see you later. That night, Alexander really did come. I didn't know what he'd said to Lily after I left. He sat across from me and drank 3 cups of tea without speaking, looking terribly conflicted. I ran out of patience. Is something on your mind? Alexander paused. I think the Empress's name is very cute. Me? Alexander pressed his lips together. Sister is beautiful and virtuous, you're incredibly cute. Had Alexander lost his mind? Maybe my reaction was too calm. Alexander narrowed his eyes and suddenly reached out, tugging at my collar. It's late, the Empress and I should rest. Whether it was my imagination or not, he was unusually attentive that night. I enjoyed it so much that a rare possessiveness rose in me. Suddenly, I didn't want Alexander going to anyone else's palace. At dawn, Alexander went to court. I was in my chamber carving a piece of jade when Cherry reported that Julian had sent 2 cups of sour plum drink from outside the palace, my favorite shop from before I entered. But just as the glass reached my lips, Alexander rushed in with a grim face and swept his sleeve, knocking the cup from my hand. It shattered on the floor. I froze. When I looked up at him, my gaze turned cold before I could stop it. Alexander seemed stung. He ground out, You dare drink something brought in from outside so casually? Julian sent it. So what if it's Julian? Alexander grew even angrier. Chloe, you and I are husband and wife, yet all you ever talk about is Julian. Do you regret not marrying him? His temper was completely unreasonable. I couldn't take it anymore. Since we are husband and wife, I hope you'll choose your words carefully. Chloe, if we could do it over, if Julian returned to the capital earlier and came to propose, would you still marry me? I didn't understand why he would ask that. While I was still stunned, he said hoarsely, I understand. Then he left without looking back. When I came back to myself, I had Cherry find out where Alexander had gone that day and whom he'd seen. She returned quickly. After court, the emperor had summoned the Marquise Anyong's heir alone in the imperial study. Julian? What had he said to Alexander to make the boy suddenly dredge up the past and storm off in anger? I wanted to see Julian at once and demand an answer, but I feared it would only make Alexander angrier. So I went to soothe him first. A few days later, on a day Alexander didn't attend morning court, I went early and requested an audience outside his bedchamber. At first, Alexander stubbornly refused to let me in, but I coughed twice in the wind and Eunuch Lu carried in a message. Alexander immediately had him bring me inside. The chamber was dim. Alexander sat at the table, lifting his head slightly toward me. I steadied myself. It's been so long. Are you still angry? Still stubborn, he said. I wasn't angry. I walked over, bowed, sat beside him, and reached out to take his hand. His face was clearly red, yet he scolded, Improper. Fine. I withdrew my hand at once and sat properly. His face darkened even more. He was impossible. I didn't bother with pleasantries. That day Julian entered the palace. What did he say to you? Alexander's expression shifted. A flicker of pain crossed his eyes. Then he ground out. Nothing. I was going to grant him a marriage, but he said he already admired someone. He said she was already married, so he shouldn't indulge in delusions. My first thought was that Julian had used me as a shield. All my life, I had never seen him feel that way about me. Besides, 2 of my engagements had been broken off one after another. If he truly loved me so deeply, how could he have done nothing at all? So that's why you were angry? I said calmly. But the Marquise Anyong's heir and I are innocent. I truly don't know how to clear myself. Alexander watched me in silence for a long time. Then he suddenly said, That day. The question I asked you. Can you answer it now? I froze, then remembered. I said at once, Now that I'm married to you, it has nothing to do with anyone else. Besides, the world doesn't run on what if. I've never thought about it. It was a standard answer, flawless on the surface. Alexander wasn't satisfied. He suddenly stood and walked to me, then bent down so close he stared into my eyes. Our noses nearly touched. Our breath tangled, warm between us. In a rough voice he said, "Sister knows. That's not what I want to hear." In eyes so close to mine, I saw a trace of pain. For a moment, I lost myself. Then I came back and said softly, "Even if the Marquise Enyong's heir came to propose, I would have nothing to do with him." In those eyes, dark as night, starlight flared. My heart softened. Enough. Alexander had never felt secure. When the Empress Dowager died, the late emperor grieved deeply, and his health was already failing. Later, turmoil shook the court, and Alexander had to shoulder everything alone. Though Nathan assisted with all his strength, he held too much power. Alexander couldn't help being wary. Thinking carefully, I was probably the only person Alexander could truly trust. I sighed inwardly. After hesitating, I reached out and gently hugged him. Alexander stiffened. Then he held me tighter, buried his face in my shoulder, and softly called, "Sister." Truthfully, when we were young, Alexander and I had been closer than we were now. With our childhood bond, even though he was the crown prince, I never felt it was improper. And Alexander was 5 years younger. When I was already of age, he was still a child. He didn't mind the boundaries between men and women. I had never been strong. When I was 17, I caught a cold and stayed in bed. I took a piece of green jade and secretly carved a camellia as Alexander's birthday gift. The next spring, Alexander rode to the outskirts and returned with an armful of camellias. He said he wanted me to see spring beyond my room. But after the late emperor died, and Alexander became the new emperor, he bore too much responsibility. Those burdens forced distance between us. I was still drifting in memory when I heard Alexander say, "Sister, do you miss your parents? I'll send you out of the palace. Go back and stay at the residence for a few days." Early the next morning, Alexander personally escorted me out of the palace and back to the scholar's residence. My instincts told me something was wrong, but Alexander looked perfectly normal, and I couldn't find a single flaw. The carriage stopped at the gate. Hand in hand, Alexander and I walked into the courtyard. Beneath the banana trees in the heat of summer, we greeted my parents. "I'm bringing the Empress home to stay a few days," Alexander said to my mother. Then, with eyes burning, he looked at me. "Sister, I'll come pick you up in a few days." He said it solemnly, like a sacred promise. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I only felt Alexander was acting oddly. I even suspected he had some other purpose in sending me out of the palace. But then I thought again. I had always acted virtuous and generous. Even if he wanted to raise someone's rank or bring someone into the palace, he wouldn't need to do it behind my back. In the end, I decided he was simply being considerate. I missed home, so he brought me back to be with my parents. I stayed home for 3 days. On the 4th, as I was carving jadeite in my room, Father suddenly came in with a grave expression. He told me the Marquise Enyong's heir was asking to see me in the main hall. I slipped the small carving knife and the jadeite into my sleeve and went out. The sunlight outside was blinding. Julian stood in the main hall in a lake blue brocade robe, hands clasped behind his back. When he saw me, he smiled warmly. "Chloe." I frowned. "I hold the position of Empress now. By proper respect between ruler and subject, you should address me as Empress. I won't take issue with it this time. Don't do it again." Julian's expression stiffened. "When did we become this distant?" I was silent for a moment, then said flatly, "Ritual cannot be neglected." Julian didn't speak. I asked, "Why have you come today?" "Only to see whether the Empress is well." Julian tugged at his mouth. "Now that I've seen you safe, I can rest easy." I didn't know why, but I heard deep mockery in his tone. Looking at Julian, I suddenly felt as though he were a stranger. Thinking back, it really had been many years since I last saw him. And when he visited the palace before, with just a few lines, he drove a wedge between Alexander and me. Alexander suspected I had feelings for Julian, while I thought Alexander really was a child. Too childish. On top of that, Alexander had told me the remnants of Marquise Jingun were active around Farwatch City. Farwatch City lay very close to the Marquise Enyong's fief in the southwest. With that in mind, I asked abruptly, why did you send sour plum drink into the palace that day? As I spoke, I fixed my eyes on him. Sure enough, caught off guard, a flash of panic crossed his face. That day I passed a shop in the capital and saw it. I remembered you used to love it before entering the palace, so I bought 2 cups and had someone send them in. I smiled. Is that so? Perhaps my expression was too indifferent. Julian said nothing more. He bowed and took his leave. I watched him go. When I turned back, I found my father standing behind me, his face heavy. What is it? Chloe, the sky is about to change. The day before I left the palace, Alexander had summoned my father to the imperial study. Lord Edward has worked tirelessly for the court. He is truly loyal, but Sister Chloe is the Empress, and I don't want to implicate her. Alexander picked up his brush and wrote 2 lines. Then he looked up at my father. Lord Edward, bring her home to stay a few days first. Once the hidden threats in the palace are removed, I'll personally bring her back. My father said Alexander had discovered that Consort Beauty looked obedient on the surface, but in secret she was colluding the remnants of Marquis Jing'an and people of the Kingdom of Li from the southern frontier, plotting to seize the throne. I thought of Consort Beauty in midwinter, in that thin red dress, dancing for Alexander, and felt utterly baffled. Could she really be that capable? Father said in a low voice. From the moment she entered the palace, Consort Beauty's goal wasn't favor, it was the Emperor's life. A bad feeling rose in me. Then the Emperor sending me out of the palace. They're preparing to make their move. At dusk, the sunset that had covered half the sky was suddenly swallowed by rolling black clouds. Then a violent rainstorm came, pressing the entire capital into darkness. I rode hard, galloping all the way to the city gate. The commander of the Imperial Guards saw me and went pale. He hesitated. Empress? I lifted my chin and shook rain from my hair. I'm back. Open the palace gate. Even with night nearing, I could see the defenses outside the palace gate had tightened sharply. If the Imperial Guards were this visible, the hidden guards were beyond question. By the time I reached the Grand Hall, I was soaked through. Alexander saw me, and for an instant his sharp expression went blank. Then he recovered, strode to me, and demanded urgently, Sister, why did you return to the palace? If I didn't come back, how long were you going to keep it from me? I held his gaze. Alexander, you've asked me more than once what we are. Now I'm telling you. We are Emperor and Empress. We are husband and wife should face hardship together. I came back to stay with you. Alexander pressed his lips together. You should stay at home. I don't need you here. At a time like this, he was still being stubborn, even though his eyes had lit up just now. I turned deliberately. Then I'll take my leave. In my head, I counted to 3. Before I reached 3, a force surged from behind and wrapped me in a tight embrace. I was drenched, chilled to the bone, but when Alexander's arms closed around me, warmth seeped through the thin fabric, rising from my waist and spreading along my skin. Broken images flashed through my mind, and my face warmed slightly. Luckily, Alexander didn't see. He only pressed his cheek to my back and said, muffled, Sister, don't go. If you don't want me to go, why did you hide all this and send me out of the palace? I asked evenly. Alexander, do you think I'm not trustworthy, or that I would drag you down? Neither. Panic edged his voice. Sister, I was afraid you wouldn't be safe in the palace. I opened my mouth to speak again, but the doors of the Grand Hall were shoved open. General Zhou, commander of the Imperial Guards, rushed in and shouted, Emperor, they've broken in through the western side passage inside the palace. The west side, that was where Pine Moon Palace was, where I had assigned Consort Beauty. Alexander, who'd been clinging to my back like a child, straightened at once. His voice turned to iron. I knew it. Pass the order. Other than Consort Beauty and the Marquise Agnon's heir, leave no one alive. Julian. So it really was him. After General Zhao left, I turned to Alexander. When did Julian start colluding with the people of the Kingdom of Li? Back when Father was gravely ill, he still forced himself to issue an edict sending the Marquise Aignan back to his fief in the southwest. He knew the man had ulterior motives, Alexander said. Besides, when Marquise Jing'an was alive, he sent secret messages to the southwest many times. I had people investigate. That's when we found Marquise Jing'an, and the Marquise Aignan already had secret dealings with the Kingdom of Li. They even recruited troops along the southern frontier border. Together, the three forces couldn't be underestimated. I could only break them one by one. I understood at once. Alexander first summoned Julian back to the capital. Then he used Nathan to execute Theodore, as a warning to Julian. But Julian didn't stop, so Alexander decided to lure them out and wipe out Julian and the kingdom of Lee conspirators who meant to force a coup. Thinking of this, I asked Alexander, that day, what did Julian put into the sour plum drink he sent in? He added nothing. It was Consort Beauty's people who added southern frontier goo poison. Still, it didn't quite fit, but it was meant for me to drink. If they want the throne, what use is poisoning an empress? Alexander fell silent. Then he said softly, because they knew I care for you. If sister were truly poisoned, I would lose my composure. Their chances of success would be higher. I stared at him, stunned, unable to find my voice. Alexander was a child I'd watched grow up. He'd always been painfully awkward. Then the late Empress and the late Emperor died young. At 13, he ascended the throne, forcing himself to rein everything in just to maintain the dignity expected of an emperor. So this was the first time I'd ever heard him say, so plainly, that he loved me. I never meant to poison you. While I was still lost in thought, a familiar voice sounded behind me. It was Julian. At some point, he had changed into armor. A long sword hung at his side as he strode into the grand hall, stopping 2 steps away from me. I turned to meet his gaze and gave him the faintest smile. He spoke with intimate warmth. Chloe, I'm not even done liking you yet. How could I poison you? Consort Beauty acted on her own. I'll deal with her. I said nothing. If it weren't for Alexander, I would have married you long ago. Chloe, do you really think those 2 broken engagements of yours were just bad luck? If Alexander hadn't interfered, would you have ended up the way you did? His lips curved again, soft and sweet. When I take this throne, you'll be my empress, I asked. What's wrong with you? Julian's smile vanished. My voice went cold. I'm Alexander's empress, and the one I love is Alexander. We used to be friends. But now that you're colluding with the kingdom of Lee, you're my enemy. Stop daydreaming. Julian stared at me, as though he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. I tugged at the corner of my mouth. Or have I played the virtuous, gentle role for so long that you forgot what I used to be like? The moment I finished, Consort Beauty stumbled into the grand hall. She was drenched in blood. Rainwater had washed her face to a deathly pallor. Gasping, she cried, "Run! Run! It's a trap!" Julian's expression changed in an instant. He yanked his sword up and drove it toward Alexander behind me. Alexander! Caught off guard, Alexander didn't even have time to dodge. With the dull sound of steel sinking into flesh, he went rigid and slowly lowered his head. The instant Julian's sword point buried itself in Alexander's shoulder, the carving knife in my hand plunged into Julian's chest. I used too much force. The blade even cut deep across my palm. Blood slid down my wrist and dripped from my fingertips, 1 drop at a time. With a heavy thud, the unfinished piece of jade hit the floor. Julian's grip slackened. He staggered back 2 steps, mouth opening as if he wanted to speak. But the moment he tried, blood poured out. Chloe, I truly wanted to marry you. Stop acting, I said flatly. If you really wanted to marry me, once word reached the Southwest, you'd have had 1,000 ways to come and propose. If you truly liked me, you wouldn't have kept driving wedges between me and Alexander after I was married. You're only saying this now because you want one last chance to stir trouble before you die, to drive a crack between me and Alexander again. Isn't that right? In the end, I never got Julian's answer, because as soon as the last word left my mouth, the light in his eyes went out. After Julian collapsed, the imperial guards arrived in time and subdued Consort Beauty. I turned back. Alexander pulled the sword from his shoulder. Pale as paper, he called me sister, and then collapsed. Later, I learned that Alexander had been planning this for days, laying one step after another. He meant to use himself as bait, lure them into attempting a coup, and wipe out that pack of traitors in a single sweep. He just hadn't expected to be wounded. When Dr. Lee came to check Alexander's pulse, he also bandaged the cut on my hand. By then, I'd already taken a hot bath and changed into clean clothes. I sat by the bed, keeping watch over Alexander. The Emperor has been pushing himself for days. His vitality is already depleted, Dr. Lee said, and the shoulder wound is deep. He must stay in bed and rest properly. After applying medicine to Alexander's shoulder, Dr. Li withdrew. Cherry tried to persuade me. You haven't slept all night and you're injured too. You should rest first. When the Emperor wakes, I'll wake you. I shook my head. You go rest. I'll stay with him a little longer. Cherry couldn't argue with me. After a bow, she left. Sitting by Alexander's bed, I couldn't stop thinking about one thing. When did I start liking him? Maybe it was the day he picked camellias and filled my bed with them. I'd been sick, swallowing bitter medicine for days. My whole body felt wretched. But Alexander came. He carried the dampness of early spring rain with him, and he brought me a brief, vivid spring, sister. Still lost in thought, I heard Alexander's voice. He opened his eyes. Maybe because of the injury, his voice was soft. What you said in the grand hall last night, did you mean it? Instinctively, I wanted to deny it. But when I met his eyes, like a sudden flare of light had sparked inside them, my heart softened. In the end, I nodded. For several days, Alexander's injuries were serious, and I cared for him the entire time. That morning, I woke early. When I arrived, I happened to hear Alexander speaking with Dr. Li inside. Dr. Li's voice held a note of helplessness. Your wound has been healed for 3 days. Are you still going to keep it from the Empress? Alexander coughed twice. That's none of your concern. Just come every day to change the dressing, and tell the Empress it's worse than it is. Is that so? Anger flared in my chest. I stepped into the room and said coldly, How bad? Why don't you and Dr. Li tell me to my face? Alexander stared at me, stunned. Dr. Li had the sense to retreat at once. I stayed where I was, expressionless, watching Alexander. He coughed hard twice. Seeing that playing pitiful wouldn't work anymore, he shifted the blame at lightning speed. I learned it from Nathan. He pretended to be sick back then to win sympathy from his wife. I picked up a few tricks. The more he spoke, the quieter he got. He knew he was in the wrong. By the end, he even sounded aggrieved. If you hadn't been so stubborn and refused to tell the truth, would I have had to resort to this? I was so angry I laughed. You're really blaming me for this? Alexander immediately changed the subject. Do you want to see Consort Beauty? I had her captured alive. She's locked in the imperial prison now. I did want to see Consort Beauty again. All that effort she'd put into winning favor, was it an act from beginning to end? If so, her acting was far too good. When the guards brought her in, she wore plain white. Wounds still marked her face. The moment she saw Alexander, her gaze cut at him like a blade. Tyrant! Alexander let out a snort. So I'm a tyrant because you failed to rebel? Hatred thickened in her eyes. If you had truly treated me like your consort, why would I have colluded with the kingdom of Li? You brought us into the palace, yet you never touched us. If you were devoted to the Empress, why provoke us at all? I frowned and asked abruptly, Did you only start colluding with the kingdom of Li after you entered the palace? Consort Beauty fell silent at once. What are you pretending for? I sneered. You didn't enter the palace with pure intentions. Did you really expect Alexander to fall madly in love with you, and then you'd abandon your mission for him, and the two of you would live happily ever after? Have you been reading too many romance tales? Consort Beauty flew into a rage. So this is your true face. That virtuous, gentle act before was all a lie to fool people. So what? You even lied to me, saying the Emperor likes virtuous, gentle women. Chloe, you live like a fraud. How do you deserve to sit as Empress? When she used every trick in the past to fight for favor, even if it was all an act, she still had a trace of charm. Now, with her face twisted and her voice hoarse from screaming, I suddenly didn't know what to say. Alexander stepped forward and drew me behind him. Calmly, he said, What I like is the Empress, not virtue. Whatever the Empress is like, that's what I like. After Consort Beauty was taken away, I still couldn't quite recover. Alexander turned to me, cautious. Sister, are you angry? I steadied myself and asked, Consort Beauty just said you brought them into the palace, but you never touched them. That's right. Then before, when you went to Consort Nobility's place and to Consort Virtue's. Alexander smiled, the corner of his mouth lifting. Consort Nobility has good tea. Consort Virtue makes good pear soup, but neither compares to your rose cherries. It finally sank in. So you were going there just to mooch food and drink? Alexander narrowed his eyes. Suddenly, he wrapped an arm around me and grinned like a smug child. "Mooch, everything in this palace belongs to me." I pressed down the hand that was starting to wander and frowned. "But if you never intended to touch them, why bring them into the palace in the first place?" Alexander was silent for a long time. "It wasn't that I insisted on bringing them in, but since ancient times, the court and the harem have been tied together. If they don't send their daughters into the palace, those old fossils won't necessarily give their all. I hadn't fully learned the balance a ruler needs. Father died, and I could only grit my teeth and keep going." Suddenly, I couldn't speak. In his position, he had to do what the position demanded. As the ruler of a nation, there were many things Alexander simply couldn't choose. Since I took this seat at 13, I couldn't truly trust anyone. "Not even Nathan," Alexander said, resting his cheek against my shoulder, his voice heavy. "If you hadn't come into the palace to stay with me, it would have been unbearable." I'd meant to press him about sabotaging my 2 engagements on purpose, but now I couldn't say a word. Alexander understood me too well. He knew exactly what to do in front of me to make my heart soften. In the end, he and I were both unbearably awkward. We'd both fallen long ago, yet neither of us would admit it first. As if whoever ever spoke first would lose. So I stubbornly kept up the image of the virtuous, gentle Empress, advising him to share his attention fairly. And Alexander, even more childishly, used the other consorts to provoke me, trying to force me to speak first. "When the court is more stable, I'll ask them what they want. Those who wish to stay in the palace, I'll see that they live without worry for the rest of their lives. Those who wish to leave and remarry, I'll prepare a generous dowry for each of them. Sister, is that all right?" Alexander spoke solemnly, watching my expression with care. I thought for a moment, then nodded. Alexander lit up. He reached out and hooked a finger around my sash, looking up at me with damp, eager eyes. "In that case, it's not so early anymore. How about the Empress and I turn in?" In the haze of desire, I suddenly remembered something. Struggling, I asked, "Right, after you met Nathan's wife that day, you started acting strange. What did she tell you?" Alexander paused, then leaned down and bit my lip. His words came out muffled. "I wanted to learn how Nathan tricked his wife into marrying him. Turns out it was useless. Humph. He's nothing special. It must be Lily who's too simple, too easy to fool." I strongly suspected he was jealous of Nathan, but the mood was already too charged to pick at it, so I said, "The Emperor is absolutely right." Alexander's smile turned even smugger, and he put even more effort into pleasing me. As I surrendered to it, I sighed to myself. A boy really is easy to soothe.